The Saints are going to close out their 2024 season this Sunday against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. What should fans be looking for in that final game of the year? What is the latest buzz surrounding the coaching search? And what the heck is going on with this roster? Because they don't have a single Pro Bowler. We'll talk about it right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast.
You're listening to the Straight Up Saints podcast.
What is up, Who Dat Nation? Welcome back inside another edition of the Straight Up Saints podcast. I'm your host, Chris Vogel, and as always, the Straight Up Saints podcast is brought to you by Scott Fickner. Injury lawyers have been injured in any kind of accident, car, truck, 18-wheeler, hurt offshore. Scott Fickner handles it all. You give him a call at 504-500-1111. They'll always fight for the win. Before I jump into our podcast for this week, kind of previewing Saints Bucks, which definitely has, not as exciting of a feel to it when, the Saints are 5-11 and you're just kind of waiting for this season to get over with. I just want to say my thoughts and prayers are definitely with, everyone in New Orleans who's been affected by what went down early this week on Wednesday morning with the terrorist attack that went down by Bourbon Street in the French Quarter. And obviously my thoughts are pretty much what everyone's heard from everyone. It's frustrating and horrifying that someone can do something this evil. And it doesn't matter that it was on a holiday. It could have been on any day. It really is scary. And look, I love the French Quarter. I think it's probably one of the places that makes me happiest. You get to walk around and you just get so much, like an influx of culture everywhere you turn, every block, every corner. And to see someone kind of just ruin, everyone's holiday and honestly, something that's going to last for a while is sickening. So my thoughts are definitely with everyone that's been affected. New Orleans has bounced back so many times and they will again, but man, it really is sickening and it's just scary. The thought that it could happen at any moment and it's just not in your control. And it's frustrating. I don't know what we can do as a country to fix it. And I think that's probably the most disturbing part, but I definitely want to extend my condolences to everyone that's been affected because it really is, just utterly depressing and there's just no other way to put it. So I'm going to try my best here to kind of provide, an escape for anyone who needs it this week. I'd imagine this has been a really, really somber week and I get it. And, you're talking about football doesn't necessarily fix everything, but if I can at least provide somewhat of a distraction for people today, that is going to be my job for at least the next 30, 40 minutes. So let's jump into this season finale for the Saints. They play the Bucks. The Bucks have a lot to play for, right? A win gets them into the playoffs. And for the Saints, don't really have a lot to play for in the standings. At 5-11, you are obviously towards the bottom. Only the Panthers worse in the division. And you're obviously heading towards a rebuild as opposed to kind of a contending program. And while it's easy to say you have nothing to play for, it's never true. And whether it's a player trying to, improve his standing on the roster, a player trying to put on tape for other teams because he's hitting free agency, or, a guy trying to prove he still belongs in the league. Like there's so many reasons. And if we're going to put together a list, I think the start of the list has to be, assuming he starts and Derek Carr misses this game, how does Spencer Rattler look? We've said it over and over again. It's kind of been a song and a dance about Spencer Rattler and whether he could be the future, whether he is just not it at all. And I'm not here to debate that part. I think that time will answer that and give us, some clarity. What I will say about Spencer Rattler is there's a theme, right? He's never had a full game where you've been impressed. He's had halves where he's looked really good. Second half against the Commanders, terrific. First half against the Raiders, really fun, really efficient. And those games, unfortunately, haven't been complete. I think of his first start with the Bucks, led them on a comeback, and then in the second half, nonstop blitz, didn't really have much to do. And you saw he really just struggled against Todd Bowles' defense, which he plays again this weekend. So it'll be interesting to see how he does the second time around. And part of it is he's a rookie, right? There are so many ups and downs that comes with a rookie quarterback that this isn't exclusive, to just Spencer Rattler, This isn't just exclusive. It's all rookie quarterbacks. There's good with the bad. And for every great throw, there's going to be one that you start scratching your head and wondering what the heck was he thinking on that down. But for the final game of the season, if Rattler can put together a consistent performance, that bodes well for him going into the offseason. That bodes well for him regardless of who the coaching staff will be next year. So I think that is important for him, and I think it's definitely one of the storylines to watch in a game that, yes, standing-wise means nothing for the Saints. It really doesn't mean anything. Even if they win, it's really not going to greatly affect their draft stock, and even if they lose, also not going to affect their draft stock. They're kind of stuck at 10 right now. It feels like they're married at that number 10 spot. So can Rattler play well? Can he finish the season on a high note? That's something I'd love to see. That's 1,000% something I'm looking forward to. Now, if he's going to play well, he's going to need good protection, and that's another story that I'm going to look at for this game. Can Trevor Penning and Fuaga, can they go out there and finish this season on a high note? There's kind of been ups and downs for both players. For Penning, the bad is real bad, and the good is awfully impressive. For Fuaga, he's been consistent for most of the year, especially the first half. I thought he was kind of, extremely exciting to watch. I think he peaked with the Browns game, kind of neutralizing Myles Garrett. But I think for them, especially Fuaga, the last couple of games is not what you expect from a player who you feel like has a super high ceiling and also super high floor, which is what made him an intriguing prospect. So, can you finish the year strong? I think it's definitely capable against this Tampa Bay defense, but those are two guys you're going to look at. Regardless, they're going to be part of the bigger picture for this team next season. So, week 18 is not going to dictate whether or not they have a job next year. They're both going to be on the Saints. They'll both be starting next year. I don't really think that's a question. However, as a fan, you want to see these players finish on a high note so you feel like you have some building blocks. I think Fuaga could definitely be a building block. I think he probably already is a building block for this team. But can you finish on one more strong note? I'd love to see that for them. Now, defensively, Kool-Aid McKinstry, Alontae Taylor, Brian Brzee, Pete Werner. Why do I mention those guys? Because those are guys that I can guarantee will be on the roster next year, and I can't say the same about pretty much everyone else on this team. So, Pete Werner, Saints paid you. Would like to see more impact from you. Alontae Taylor, great in the slot, horrible on the outside. What's it going to be? Is the next coach going to say, hey, primarily slot, maybe even move to safety? I know he hasn't wanted to make that switch, but you're not an outside corner. I think we've gotten the answer. Kool-Aid McKinstry, same thing I just said about Fuaga. You're a rookie. You know that your job is secure for next year. You don't have to worry about being on a roster bubble. Just like Fuaga, I think Kool-Aid will be a starter next year. But, there is inconsistencies, especially at a tough position. Cornerback's so hard to play in this league. Can he finish strong against a Tampa Bay offense that's humming? And I think that would be a really, really good showcase for him. I mean, Tampa Bay just put up 48 points on Carolina. If you can go out there and kind of neutralize that attack from Tampa Bay, and they're going to want to air it out all day long with Baker Mayfield, Mike Evans, and that offense, I think that would be kind of putting the arrow in the right direction if you're Kool-Aid McKinstry. So that's another player you want to watch. And then Brian Brzee. I think Brian Brzee is, definitely a guy that has taken that next step from a pass rushing perspective. He is definitely a building block on this team. Run defense, not so much. But, is there another impact player or two that he can make on Sunday? Maybe get to Baker Mayfield and force a turnover. So you're looking at all the young guys. And yet, I'm going to finish this talking about a veteran who is a Saints legend, and that is Cam Jordan. Now, I don't know for a fact that this will be Cam Jordan's last game. So I don't know if he's going to retire. I don't want to spread rumors about him retiring, but the fact that it's just been mentioned so many times, and I feel like, every day reporters talking about how lucky we are that the Saints still have Cam Jordan, and I do agree with them for that, both as a player and a person. If this is his last game, I'd love nothing more for him to kind of go out with, 2+ sacks against a division rival and make a couple of impact plays. He has played well down this stretch, and there's been moments at the beginning of the season where I thought, man, it's over for him, and he has really stepped up. That said, one last division game, if this were to be it for him, I would love to see Cam Jordan go out with a signature performance, and either way, he can go out there, record 0 tackles, 0 sacks. He's still a Saints legend. The man is an excellent football player, but more importantly, a really, really, really good role model for people to look up to, especially young kids these days. And I just hope we get one more vintage NFC South performance from him if this were to be his last game. So we'll see what happens, but those are definitely, kind of storylines that I'm looking at. And I'm not saying that that's all you can look at, but with so many injuries, no Alvin, no Olave, no Shaheed, you got to be a little selective. And those are the guys that I'm definitely looking at this moment. Now, let's switch it over to the Pro Bowls, because the Pro Bowl voting came out this week. and the Saints have 0 Pro Bowlers. And it's unfortunate, and it's not what you want. Now, I guess you can make an argument no one cares about the Pro Bowl, but it does matter. It matters for these players financially. It is a nice little vacation for them. They can take family members once the season's over. I'm sure it's cool opportunities for the kids. That's one thing I used to love about Drew Brees going to the Pro Bowl. Obviously I would like to see him in more Super Bowls than Pro Bowls, but it was always cool kind of seeing the Brees family interact with all the players. So I'm sure these are cool experiences for the players, regardless of what the Pro Bowl has become as opposed to what it used to be. But for the Saints, they have 0, and they're one of 4 teams that fall in that category. The Jets, Titans, and Dolphins are the other 3. And I think when you look at that right now, it's just kind of, a capture of what the Saints are as a roster. A couple of talented players here and there, a couple aging vets, but overall not enough to really be excited about where this team is heading from a roster building perspective. Now, Alvin is still a stud. It's unfortunate he's not going to the Pro Bowl. Maybe he ends up being an alternate. I really don't know what's going to happen. We'll see what really happens there. But, Alvin is still Pro Bowl caliber. Doesn't get in. Eric McCoy, your year's kind of, a prisoner to injuries, I would say. He is a Pro Bowl talent, just hasn't been healthy this year. And obviously the Saints have kind of paid the price for him not being there. Olave, I think, can become a Pro Bowl caliber wide receiver. He's not there yet, but there are talented players. Shaheed's made the Pro Bowl before, so I'm not saying the Saints don't have Pro Bowlers, but remember when the Saints were really good a couple years ago, it felt like they were sending 10 guys to the Pro Bowl, and the fact that you can't even send 1 right now, there's a lot of factors. You can talk about voting. I don't think Saints fans are as engaged to vote for their team as much as they used to be, and I understand it because there's a disconnect when you're frustrated with a franchise. That could be part of it. But the other part, and the more obvious part, because I'm not dumping this on the Saints fan base, and we're definitely not going to take the blame here, is the roster construction, right? This roster simply isn't good enough. And I think when you see that they have 0 Pro Bowlers and they finished this year probably with a 5-12 record, kind of makes sense. Talent wins in this league. Coaching wins in this league. Unfortunately for the Saints, they don't check off either box. So when I see 0 Pro Bowlers, it is frustrating, but it also comes down to the GM part. And the reason I say that is there's a certain player that did make the Pro Bowl, and that will bring us to our tweet of the week here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. And as always, our tweet of the week is brought to you by Standard Mortgage, your local lender for life. To get in touch with the home loan expert today, give them a call at 504-569-3902. Zach Baun, who's in his first year with the Eagles, has made it to the Pro Bowl. He's been outstanding. There's no doubt about it. But do you know how frustrating it is when Zach Baun in his first year with the Eagles makes it to the Pro Bowl and has been, in my opinion, the best linebacker in football this year when the Saints had him in their building? It is extremely frustrating. So when I see the 0 Pro Bowler part, I think this falls on the GM. And the reason I say that is I feel like the last couple of weeks I've been watching players that the Saints haven't retained look really good. And it makes you wonder, what the heck is the GM doing? Because if it's not Zach Baun making the Pro Bowl, it's Caden Ellis looking really good on a Sunday night football game. And if it's not Caden Ellis looking really good on a Sunday night football game, it's Trey Hendrickson lighting up an opposing team's offensive line. So the Saints have let talent walk out that door. And I'm not saying signing those 3 guys means you would have had a Pro Bowler this year, because clearly it's a fit. It's a scheme fit for Baun in Philly with Vic Fangio that's really let him blossom. But the talent was there in New Orleans, and you've let some talent walk. And unfortunately, the guys that you've kept have not been playing well. And I'm not saying those guys aren't good. I'm saying clearly there is a culture problem, a coaching problem in New Orleans, and you're not getting the best out of your guys because some of these guys are leaving elsewhere and having success. So that's what I took when I looked at this whole Pro Bowl thing and not having any of them on the roster. It's frustrating. It is kind of, embarrassing to a certain degree, but it's not just not having talent, right? That's a factor of it. I think Mickey is drafted poorly. I've been, adamant about that. But I think more importantly, a GM's job when you do draft talent is find a way to keep these guys in the building. And the Saints aren't keeping these guys in the building. And whether it's a calculated move or not, you're messing up. So someone's got to kind of, take on accountability for that. And we haven't seen it yet. So I think that part's been frustrating to me. But what are you going to do? The Saints have kind of been married to the roster that they have and the regime that they have. And I don't know if that's going to change this offseason. What I do believe will change this offseason, though, is the coaching staff, regardless if they keep the interim coach as the guy for 2025. So we're going to talk about the coaching staff and 3 candidates that have been talked about and generating buzz. Before I do that, I want to get a quick word from Scott McNair.
And Jonathan Williams brings it all the way back from the 20-yard line. What a terrific way to end the first half.
And tonight's game is brought to you by Scott Vickner Injury Attorneys. They always fight for the win.
You mean attorney? It's one lawyer. Scott Vickner?
No, there's two.
Brad Scott and David Vickner.
Well, it's confusing.
That it is. They could have picked a better name.
Scott Vickner Injury Attorneys. We fight for the win.
Once again, thank you to Scott Vickner for being part of the program. We greatly appreciate it. We're going to keep it rolling here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. We're going to talk about the three coaching candidates that have somewhat emerged at this point for the Saints. And I think this doesn't mean that a candidate has been, labeled the favorite, although I do think the Saints are trending one way. And that one way is the first candidate I'll mention is Aaron Glenn, Lions defensive coordinator. I feel like he is the no-brainer pick for the Saints. I feel like he is the guy who will eventually get picked by the Saints. Now, could things change? Absolutely. Could Aaron Glenn turn down the job? Yeah, if he gets offered another one that's better, absolutely. And honestly, I think Aaron Glenn should be offered more than one job. I don't think this should be Saints or nothing for Aaron Glenn. Maybe the Jets, maybe another team out there decides to go after him. So I think Aaron Glenn is an exciting coaching candidate. Now, there is a frustrating aspect to Aaron Glenn being the next head coach, and that would be, Mickey keeping what he knows. That said, I don't want to let that aspect and that negativity cloud my opinion of Aaron Glenn. I think Aaron Glenn is an exceptional coach, and I think the fact that the Lions are top 10 in scoring defense, despite losing almost every single starter to season-ending injury, is a testament to his scheme, a testament to his ability to lead men, and pretty much do patchwork with this defense, because that's what he's done. That's literally what he's done this entire year. Guys are in, guys are out. If it's not Aiden Hutchinson going down, it's Ali McNeil. If it's not Ali McNeil, it's Anzalone. If it's not Anzalone, it's Carlton Davis. They are losing guys every single week, and yet they do just enough defensively, forcing some turnovers. So I think Aaron Glenn, you're going to get good DB play out of him as the coach. You're going to get a really good leader. I think guys would gravitate toward him. And he's been mentioned multiple times. Jeremy Fowler from ESPN's mentioned him. Ian Rappaport's mentioned him. Obviously the connection with the Saints is something that's going to be strong for his candidacy. So I believe Aaron Glenn's going to be one of the top coaching candidates, if not the top coaching candidate. And he's definitely one of the three here that continues to be linked to the Saints. So we cannot ignore him. The second one is someone already in the building right now, Darren Rizzi. And now I think Rizzi, his resume doesn't look as strong as it may have looked 3 weeks ago. I thought, the Commanders' loss was pretty good for him. You fight a playoff team till the very end. You go for two, right decision, just doesn't work out. And you would say, okay, you're 3-2. Your losses, though, are to a Rams team that's in the playoffs and a Commanders team that's in the playoffs. So not the worst thing in the world. Last 2 weeks, though, have been rough. You get blown out by the Packers, and then you look really flat at home against the Raiders. And I think that might be worse than the Packers, because at least the Packers, they got dudes. They got a playoff team. Understandable, right? Sometimes you just kind of get your teeth kicked in on a Monday night on the road in Lambeau. Shit happens. Raiders game was rough. Now, it doesn't derail Rizzi completely. I think he's going to be one of the top candidates that the Saints look at, because I think they like his ability to lead. I think they like what he's done so far in the building. Now, do I think he'll get the job? My guess is no, but there's a lot of people still talking about him. Ian Rappaport earlier this week was talking about how Rizzi still commands a lot of respect within the building. And whether or not that would be my pick, that's a different story. But I do believe he's going to be one of the guys that the Saints absolutely consider when they do this. And I think for Rizzi, I mentioned Aaron Glenn. He should have multiple options. I don't know if Rizzi yet at this stage in his coaching career will have multiple options. And if one of 32 knocks on your door, regardless of the cap situation, regardless of the roster situation, because you do know that team, you have been there for a while, you're probably saying yes. You're probably not turning that down. So I'm not saying Rizzi is going to get the job. I do believe he's going to be one of the 3-4 candidates that the Saints strongly look at. Now, the third that's been mentioned this week, and quite interesting, and I'm not saying I like it, but I'm also not going to, kind of throw my arms up in disgust, is Mike McCarthy, who, again, I don't even think is going to take this job, but it was mentioned this week. NFL Network talked about McCarthy's connection with the Saints. Remember, he was here from 2000 to 2004, so there is an established connection with Mickey Loomis, and he is a free agent. His contract with the Cowboys is up. Now, I don't want Mike McCarthy. Only reason I don't is I want the Saints to kind of go with more new, innovative ideas. McCarthy doesn't exactly do that for me. I do think the Saints can get a lot worse than Mike McCarthy. They've done a lot worse with Mike McCarthy. I mean, they just had Dennis Allen for 2.5 seasons. So I don't think McCarthy is a bad coach. I just don't think that is the coach that's going to rebuild New Orleans and what they need to do from a football program, right? His teams have been undisciplined at times. His teams, at least the last couple of years, have not been able to get over the hump in the playoffs. And he's had talent, way more talent than he would have if he steps into New Orleans. So I don't think McCarthy's going to go there. I mean, I think Dallas, frankly, is going to probably re-sign him anyway. But he is a name being mentioned in the Saints, and it's the one that kind of caught my eye, not because I want it to happen. Truthfully, out of the three I mentioned, I think Aaron Glenn might be the most appealing, and I think he is the most appealing. But it's one that catches your eye because what an interesting move that would be from his standpoint. Contract expires with Dallas. If you go to New Orleans, 60-something million dollars over the cap, don't have your quarterback in the future. You know that meme where it's like, well, what is he cooking? What were they cooking? I don't know what the hell he'd be cooking if that's what he decides to do and make that switch. So he's a name that's been mentioned. I don't think he ends up being the Saints head coach at all. I think he stays in Dallas. But when he gets linked to this team, I can't ignore it, right? I have to mention it and bring it up because it's just so fascinating of a potential pairing. But out of the three, and, we'll see what happens. Saints can interview other guys. I've been a big believer in Liam Cohen, although he has not been linked to the Saints. I think he's a hell of an offensive coordinator. And what he's done with Baker Mayfield is super intriguing. But I don't think he's going to get the job. I think he might go elsewhere. But if you're just saying pick between those three, I think Aaron Glenn's probably the guy that ends up getting the job. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I just hope the Saints do a full search in New Orleans because, us fans definitely want to see them get back to being a winner. And finding the right coach is the first step to doing that. So we'll see what happens. But those are the three candidates that stand out. Now, let's get into any comments and thoughts that you guys have here on our fan Q&A presented by Sunshine, your hometown John Deere. Nothing runs like a deer. Let's go through it. I'm sure we got some comments here regarding, what we opened up the show with. So I'll get through them. Rachel says the city will rally. We've been through so much. No question about it. Obviously, as I mentioned at the start with what happened on Wednesday morning with a horrific attack, the city has been through a lot. They will bounce back. There's no doubt in my mind. It just really is frustrating to have to feel like you're saying the same thing of, they'll bounce back and don't worry. Like at some point you kind of wish all that would stop and they don't have to bounce back. They just continue to shine. So, but I do agree with your point. Moonshine and Hollow Point says, man, rest in peace to my cousin. May he rest in peace. My cousin gone way too soon. Damn. First off, sorry for your loss. I'm my thoughts are with you. But obviously this is just a really, really tough week. And, like I said at the start, guys, it's tough to just say, hey, football's back, but trying to find any type of joy during tough moments, I guess, is obviously paramount, but it's easier said than done. Kyle says, I send my sympathies to the victims and those who were injured. I hope the city of New Orleans rallies through this. The city and the people have been through too much tragedy. I totally agree, Kyle. No question about it. Jerry says, Chris, Who Dat Nation. Kyle says, when it comes to the team, I'd like to see our young players and rookies have a good game and end their season on a good note. Yep. I mean, look, when you go into the final game of the season, you're probably staring 5-12 right in the face. The least you can get is some entertainment from your guys. I would like to think that the Saints will play well or well enough in this spot. So we'll see what happens. I'm not expecting, I'm not expecting this team to go out there and beat Tampa Bay. I mean, the spread it was like 14.5 last time I checked. I don't know if it went up even higher, but I'd like to see New Orleans show some fight. You're playing for your city right now, especially with what they're going through. Doesn't mean you got to win, but you definitely can't just kind of, go out with a whimper to end this season. No one wants to see that. So we'll see what happens. Pablo says, I just don't trust Mickey to get the rebuild right. Dude struck gold bringing in Sean and Drew, but has squandered so many years of that duo. Post Breeze and Sean has been god-awful. So what is he doing? It's a good question. It's one that I really don't have the answer for. I wish I had the answer for. And I think it's one where, truthfully, like I've said before, guys, I don't think Mickey Loomis should be the guy that is running this rebuild. I just think that there's too much that we know right now of him struggling to get the job done. That said, look, I think New Orleans is going to give him, one more go at this. If he doesn't get the right coach, I think he'll be out of here, and we'll see. So hopefully he gets it right. I do think they have to change so much, though. They're whiffing on too many draft picks. They're not making the right free agency decisions. There's just not a lot of good right now. So, I agree with you. I agree with you wholeheartedly. I don't know how us fans can trust Mickey Loomis, and frankly, I don't trust Mickey Loomis. But We just got to hope that somehow, some way, Saints can strike twice. I don't know if they will, but we got to hope. Jerry says Pro Bowl ain't worth watching anymore. I totally agree, Jerry. It's kind of a mockery. I don't know the fix for it, though. I really don't know what fixes the Pro Bowl. Kyle says, same mindset as yours, Pablo. I don't trust Loomis. I hope he's no longer our GM because he's responsible for why the Saints are in the deepest, darkest hell of football. I agree with that. I don't think that's a lie at all. I think that what the Saints are in right now is really because of bad management. Pablo says that in the draft being a hit and miss for Mickey as well, more of the latter than the former under his leadership, given how many players have been drafted and turned out to be terrible. It is possible. Look, they've also developed talented players. Donald brings up here, we developed Bond, Ellis, Anzalone, Hendrickson. Yeah, and they end up walking. And I think that's probably the frustrating part, right? When you see that talent on display and you say, hey, I would love to keep that homegrown player, and then you don't. So I think for me, that is where I get the most frustrated. Kyle says, I'm so pissed about how we handled Zach Bond. I blame Loomis and Dennis Allen for how we used and developed Bond. I don't know if you guys read that story about Zach Bond. You start talking about how tough it was in New Orleans, kind of crying in his car. And you wonder about like, hey, is the NFL going to work out for him? So the fact that he's having a great year with Philly is awesome. I'm happy for Zach Bond. I always thought he was a really, really talented player. And, this is a guy that going into the draft had first round talent and fell for reasons beyond his control at that point. And look, you see what he does with Philly and you wonder, how do you just not get this guy to be on your team in an impactful way? And the Saints somehow squandered that. So it's something we're going to have to deal with as Saints fans, because I think this is who Zach Bond probably is. Maybe not to this level, right? I don't know if he can continue playing like the best linebacker in football, but I know he can play at a really, really high level and way better than what we've seen in New Orleans. So kudos to him, man. He's been through a hell of a lot, and he's balled out this year. It's frustrating that it's not in the Saints uniform, but he's balled out. Pablo says, heck, look at how many players we let go or didn't draft to go after those big defensive end prospects. That both Sean and Mickey liked, i.e. Davenport and company. Stupid ass strategy. Yeah, it's a stupid strategy, and it looks even worse when it fails, right? Davenport, swing and a miss. Peyton Turner, swing and a miss. So for New Orleans, when you whiff on those and then you actually do get some talent, but you let it walk or you don't utilize that player correctly, super frustrating. But when you mention Davenport and we mentioned Peyton Turner, it gets me thinking that's why I want changes, because I think the Saints have their prototypes and the prototypes just don't work right now, at least not on the defensive end, not at the defensive end position. So we'll see what happens. I don't expect them to make massive changes and start changing their prototypes, right? Like they like those big defensive ends. They love the relative athletic score, but got to start tweaking it, because you are not exactly building a team stacked with young talent. Jerry says, it would be nice if Loomis gets fired. Rob says, I'll settle for Loomis being kicked upstairs. I think that's probably the more likely of the scenario, but I know a lot of fans agree with you, Jerry. I think a lot of people would like to see Loomis get canned this offseason. Kyle says, Mike McCarthy's a predictable, out of touch, and incompetent head coach. Hire McCarthy would be so horrible that we have Dumb and Dumber New Orleans. Dumb is McCarthy, and dumber is Loomis. I do believe he is predictable. I don't think he's like out of touch, though. I still think he is a solid football coach, but you don't settle for mediocre. And I think McCarthy he's kind of like the baseline for what a head coach can do or be. And you should not be settling for a Mike McCarthy. Kyle says, my top head coaching candidates are Vrabel, Aaron Glenn, and Joe Brady. Vrabel is the impact, quality, and culture builder head coach that the team needs. Glenn is an impactful leader, and Brady is an impact and innovative coach. Yeah, I think Joe Brady's interesting. I think that he's still a year or two away from being intriguing in my eyes. I think Liam Cohen is a far more intriguing offensive coordinator candidate personally. And obviously I'm not benching Ben Johnson because I don't see how he goes to the Saints. Maybe I'm being delusional or not fair, but I just don't see it. But I do believe that, Vrabel and Glenn are the most interesting and probably the two guys that I feel the most comfortable about. Like, I think if the Saints get Vrabel, I feel really good about that. I think if the Saints get Glenn, I feel really good about that. I can't say that about anyone else for sure. I'd be excited about Liam Cohen, but obviously there's going to be some concerns. Obviously, I'd be ecstatic about Ben Johnson, but I genuinely don't think there's any chance he comes here. But I do agree with your list. I mean, it's a pretty solid list. The only one I'd have doubts about would be Joe Brady. I just don't think he's ready for it. And I also want to say, be very, cautious with these coaches that have rock star quarterbacks, because it is so easy to look great with Josh Allen. And then when you go to New Orleans, you don't got a Josh Allen to save you. It's tough. And the reason I say that is, look at a guy like Brian Daboll, who had Josh Allen, became a hot shot offensive coordinator candidate, goes to the Giants. Yeah, they had success his first year. They've been a train wreck since. And, life is not easy when you move away from those top quarterbacks. But obviously, Joe Brady, there is a New Orleans connection. And quarterbacks have played well under him, the good ones at least, with Burrow and Josh Allen. Pablo says if Ben Johnson doesn't go to Chicago, Gale needs to throw money at Ben to get him in the building. Let him shape this team and his vision and go from there. Ideally, yes. And I do think money talks to a certain degree. So maybe I shouldn't rule out Ben Johnson going. But I do believe that, for this team, it's just there's too many negative things surrounding them for the Saints to end up landing Ben Johnson. I just don't see it, but we'll see. Ed says, Happy New Year. All the best, Aaron Glenn. Or I'm guessing you were going for John Gruden here, getting the job. Safe pick for mom and pop organization. I could be wrong. I guess you were going John Gruden here for this one. I feel like that's got to be what it was, but spell check can be an absolute bitch at times. So I'm guessing that's what changed Gruden to. But yeah, I do think that Aaron Glenn is the popular pick. And if it's one where if you had to put money down, even though you don't feel great about, putting money down on things like these, that's probably the guy that you go with. Kyle says Ben Johnson wants organizational alignment. Unfortunately, he will not find alignment with Loomis, who's unwilling to admit that fuck up that he made and is arrogant, out of touch donkey. Randy says, I think Ben Johnson wants to pick his GM wherever he goes. There has been talk about that, which again, I think that's another hurdle in New Orleans' way. You already have a GM there. You have a really bad cap situation. You don't have a quarterback. Like, what is the sell? What's the sell to Ben Johnson? What's the pitch you can make? Rob says, I'm going to preach patience with the cap situation. I agree. Rob, I know it's not ideal, but this is what I look at for when I see the Saints, right? Next 2 years, you are not going to be spending a lot, and we just have to deal with it. What the Saints need to do in these next 2 years, though, and if they do that, I think will really, really, really get the Saints back to a good spot. You got to draft well in those 2 years. I'm talking multiple players that can make an impact day one in multiple drafts, back-to-back drafts of getting, let's say, 6 or 7 guys that can be impact players. If you can do that, not 6 to 7 each draft, but let's say 6 to 7 total over the next 2 years that are building blocks, you're getting the Saints back to a good spot. So you need to draft well, and you got to obviously have the right coach. And you can see if you have the right coach, right? You got to have patience. And if they make the right moves, but you feel like it's a talent deficiency, then I think you probably do have the right coach. You just got to figure out the roster part. And the Saints, obviously, from a roster standpoint, don't have a ton of talent. But I'll definitely be patient with the cap situation. Out of everything the Saints have going on, I'm with you. That's the one thing that, I'm not stressed about. I do believe it's going to hurt them when they're trying to get a coach, right? It's not the easiest sell, but I do believe that this team, that is something you can fix, right? You fix bad cap by not spending for a little and drafting well. If you do that, you get right back to where you need to be. So the Saints can get the right coach and they can get the right talent in the building, they'll bounce back. Linda says Gruden is great, but the NFL hates him. Too much drama. The refs hate the Saints enough. We don't need that smoke. All right, here's my argument for John Gruden, right? I forget about all the email stuff, which obviously isn't ideal. You do not want your coach being a guy with a very questionable character. John Gruden has not gone over 500 since 2008. It's now 2025. So that's my argument, right? Maybe he's still a good coach, but we haven't seen it since 2008. His best record with the Raiders was 8-8. So that's where I have, reservations about him, outside of the fact that his character is suspect. But I understand that the NFL is all about winning, right? And you'll overlook certain things if you can win. So fine. Let's for a second overlook that part, which is not something you really want to overlook because the guys in the locker room have to respect your coach. The dude doesn't win anymore. That's my problem. Outside of all the other stuff. Like I said, he hasn't won gone over 500 since 2008. He hasn't won over 10 games since 2005. The year's 2025. Ed says Saints will get good by 2027. The contracts will get off the books, and Saints fans have no patience. I agree with the no patience part. Us fans definitely have no patience. I definitely have no patience, but with everything in life. But I do believe that 2027 is the first year you kind of see the light at the end of the tunnel if the next 2 years go well. And I do agree with that part. Charles says John Gruden's overrated. He's statistically an average at best coach. Ed says, I'm afraid whoever coaches the Saints is being set up to fail with the situation going on. I don't want Glenn getting the job, not succeeding, then can't find a next job. Yeah, I understand that part. My argument would be, right, if you bring in a coach and they find a way through this shitstorm to kind of show that light at the end of the tunnel and expedite the Saints path to getting back to being a good team, then you might have your guy for the next 15 years. And then that means all of us are going to have huge smiles on our faces for the next 15 years. So I do agree with that part. I think it's definitely something to be worried about with this situation, right? And that's why I do believe people will mention Rizzy because, hey, maybe Rizzy takes the I don't want to say the beating, but is your coach for the next year or two before you get the right spot for the next guy. And that is possible. But I think you just have to trust whoever you get in the building, reach patience with them, and hope they can weather the storm. If they could, you'll be in a good spot once you get out of it. So before we talk about who is the next coach and the Saints make a hire, they got to get through Week 18. And Week 18 is this Sunday against the Bucs. Saints don't have anything to play for in terms of standings, but they do got pride to play for and a city to play for. And hopefully they represent New Orleans well in that final game of the season. We'll have our halftime show powered by 4D on Sunday, final halftime show of the season. So we will be there to talk about it. So make sure you guys subscribe to Boo Crew Media's YouTube page. And also we'll have our post-game live stream once it wraps up right here on the Straight Up Saints podcast. So that's going to wrap it up. And as always, guys, stay tuned for more here from the destination for the Who Dat Nation.